and now we're going to talk about objectives. And the objectives really tie closely with the vision. So there are different tools that you can use for setting objectives. You may have heard of the balanced scorecard. You can certainly look at key performance indicators. SWOT analysis, which is looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Risk analysis, overall equipment effectiveness, return on investment, net present value or even annual values, and of course benchmarking. All of these should help you to identify where you are now and what's the target that you're trying to achieve. So let's talk about stating objectives. So objectives provide quantitative values for the expected outcomes. So remember in our earlier examples about environmental health and safety and finance, so tying these to the vision statement, equipment reliability improvements will reduce production waste by 5% or more, 30% reduction in reportable incidents, 0 lost time events, no regulatory violations, and all sumps with over 10 gallons of lube oil will have condition-based oil changes. Now these should also, I was a little negligent here, each of these objectives should have a time associated with them. So we'll assume these are all annual or one-year goals or objectives. What about financial? Some objectives here would be, over this year, let's reduce a 5% reduction in annual maintenance cost per unit produced, 10% reduction in inventory holding cost, 15% reduction in employee turnover, and less than 5% overtime costs. Those are just some examples. So now that we have mission, vision, value, and objectives, we should have a master plan that helps us to go down the road and achieve these things. The master plan makes specific statements about what will be done and in what sequence. It's tied tightly to the mission, vision, values, and objectives. The master plan should include a Gantt chart and estimates of the labor, time, and other resources that are going to be needed, as well as any interdependencies, such as needing operations or support or engineering or capital projects to help us with some of these objectives. Master plans should include a description of the initiatives associated with each objective. So how do we administer the strategic plan once that plan has been put into place? So to successfully implement a strategic plan, you have to have supporting elements that help with risk mitigation. So first thing is making the business case. A business case package should include an executive summary and a discussion of the problems to be solved. There should be information, analysis, and recommendations. There should be key data to illustrate its significance and its severity and complexity. Recommendations while presenting the business case. So once you've decided on the business case, these are the recommendations that you should have as you're presenting the business case to the stakeholders. The first is present the strengths and weaknesses. Where are you absolutely certain and where are you not so certain? You want to be able to identify customers and other stakeholders and how they will be affected. You should state the assumptions, the estimates, and other weaknesses in your underlying analysis. Present the options available to the decision makers, comparing the features, costs, and benefits, and stakeholder impacts for each option. An important thing to keep in mind: never mislead or embellish to get your agenda passed. If you're missing something in your analysis, it's better to get the feedback early and be disappointed than to go forward under a false assumption and to have your reputation and the trust that you develop destroyed. Let's talk a bit about champions. So champions are, they're a significant factor in the success of any project. The strategic plan needs ownership at the executive level, as well as at the staff level. We want to identify champions at all levels of the organization and have them help define what's in it for the people that they influence. It's important to identify stakeholders who may be champions in other departments, such as marketing or corporate planning and procurement, contracting, operations, or other business development. Communication plans. These are very important because you have to be able to communicate and keep people engaged in projects and processes and change management activities. So the communication plan includes who. Who refers to the target audience and whether they're resistors, neutral, or supporters. The what. These are the key messages to be articulated. What are we trying to get across through this communication plan? When. This is the timing, the appropriate time of delivery for each message, including how often that message is going to be repeated and how often updates are going to be provided. The communication plan also describes the why, the desired outcome. And what we're trying to do here is to help to move people who are resistors to being at least neutral, and if possible, move neutral to being supporters, and to also maintain support from the supporters. How? This is the communication vehicle. How is the message going to be delivered? Is it going to be face-to-face, over the phone? Is it going to be a PowerPoint presentation? What specifically is the communication vehicle? And by whom? Who's going to be the sender of that message? That's the person who will deliver the message and the information, and how he or she is chosen. So sometimes there may be a relationship between somebody that's on a project team and one of the targets of the communication plan. It might be more appropriate to select a person who has a relationship as opposed to somebody who may have the more formal requirement or the more formal stature to be able to communicate. It all depends on, what you're trying to accomplish with that communication plan. Project milestones. So milestones are just tools that are used in project management to mark specific points along project timelines. Milestones, these points, they may signal a project start and an end date, might signal a need for a senior management review or input of some stakeholder, or it could be when resource or budget checks have to be looked at to make sure that we're not exceeding our limits. Milestones don't impact the project duration. They're the points of interest that have to be completed to achieve success. A good project management plan will include timelines that allow the organization to clearly see the time investment necessary to implement the plan and project. So now you've gone through with a strategic plan, you've come up with what you're going to put in place, you've come up with the communication plan, and now you've been running through those projects and working towards those objectives. So now we have to be able to measure performance. So measuring the right things the right way is key to a successful maintenance and reliability strategic plan. We need to first talk about leading and lagging indicators. Leading indicators are an indicator that measures performance before the process results start to follow a particular pattern or trend. Leading indicators measure your performance on doing the right things day to day, and they should be aligned with the direction and guidance that are available. Some examples are things like PM compliance, scheduled work compliance. You might even look at things like lubrication average particle count values if you're trying to improve your lubrication program. Mean time between value and critical systems, number of bearings and seals replaced per month. Lagging indicators, on the other hand, are indicators that measure performance after a business or process results start to follow a particular pattern or trend. Lagging indicators measure the results from the day-to-day efforts. And some examples of lagging indicators might be something like maintenance costs per unit produced, could be maintenance costs as a percentage of total cost, return on investment, return on net assets, or reliability growth for a system or a piece of equipment. When we set up measures, they should be able to cascade down through the organization. And so when we think about at a corporate level, you might be looking at a lagging indicator, that's the total cost per unit. At the function level, whether it's maintenance or operations, you could be looking at maintenance cost per unit or operations cost per unit, again, lagging indicators. At the work center level, though, that's where leading indicators have the most impact. So the percent of planned work and the percent of scheduled compliance are things that can certainly feed into the maintenance cost per unit. Just as within operations, the time spent on changeovers can have an impact on operations cost per unit. So the idea here is to consider both leading and lagging indicators and also make sure that they're aligned and cascade down through the organization. When you develop KPIs or performance measures, I'd strongly recommend that one of your first stops, if you're first setting up KPIs, is to look at the library within SMRP. There's individual measures that, because they are a standard, they have more credibility than if you try to develop them on your own. These, of course, have definitions, the objectives, the actual formula, the component definitions, etc. So they're very well done, and I'd highly recommend that you start there. So then we have to establish some targets. So key performance indicators will tell you whether you are achieving your strategic objectives or not. You need targets to communicate the level of performance that you're actually achieving and what you're trying to achieve. So how do you set the targets? You can follow these simple steps. The first thing is to set that long-term target, and that should be from one of your objective statements. The second thing is to determine the leading and lagging indicators that help you to measure and achieve that target. Then calculate your current leading and lagging indicators, and then periodically recalculate them to check your progress. And it's a good thing to define interim goals for moving towards and achieving that target. So if your target is to reduce inventory holding costs by 10% over the year, what you might be able to do is look at monthly targets or quarterly targets to help you move towards that goal so that at the end of the year, it's not one big jump. We want to guide performance through accountability and leadership. So once we set those targets and we're trying to achieve the longer term targets, it takes accountability from the leadership team, and it takes leadership capability from the leadership team to be able to keep the team moving forward. So now let's talk about organizational change. Let's say your strategic plan had some major changes in it, such as we're going to put in a new work order management process. Well, organizational change can propel maintenance, reliability, and asset management programs forward. But if they're done properly, if they're done poorly, it can prevent success and even cause more problems. So this is something that maintenance and reliability professionals need to be really good at. First, there's several different change models. And a change model is simply a tool that provides guidance on how organizational change should be prepared, implemented, and sustained. Each model includes a set of tools and various approaches to assist the staff through the change curve. Here are some of the more popular models that you may have heard of. The ProSci Enterprise Change Management Model, John Cotter's 8-step change process, Lewin's unfreeze, change, and refreeze process, General Electric's change acceleration process, and ProSci's ADKAR model for changes in individuals. Now, I'll say this also, in a recent webinar, we did a poll, and about 80% of the people polled had never heard of any of these change models. And I would just say that whatever change model that's chosen, any change model can be effective, and any change model can be ineffective. The effectiveness depends on the organization's leadership culture, and the leadership team needs to be accountable, and they need good leadership capabilities. So each one of these models, and there are many others, but each one of these models has specific steps and requirements that they propose for use to go through a change process. If you don't follow those change process steps, or if your leadership team is not strong enough to implement and sustain those changes, then it's going to be very difficult to keep those changes that have occurred in place and beneficial to the organization. Oftentimes, maybe 75 or 80% of the times, they backslide. So choosing which model, I guess my message is, no matter what model you choose, you still have to execute that model. So I talked about the change curve a moment ago. The most popular one that I've come across is a thing called the J curve. And that's where you start out with an initiative. There's a change that we want to implement. In the initial stages, there's hope. People feel like when we put this change in place and everything's going to get better downstream. There's optimism, excitement, and energy around the change. A short time later, once the change process has begun and we're starting to design and define what it is that we're trying to accomplish, people begin to feel overwhelmed. There's confusion. They may start exhibiting resistance and stress. They become skeptical whether we're ever going to get there. They wonder if they belong on this team. They then hit the depression, the pessimism and despair, the bottom of the J curve. They wonder, what the heck am I doing here? Where do I fit in on this team? You're not okay and I'm not okay. I don't know how we're ever going to get out of this. But then it continues. They start gaining a little bit more understanding. They start thinking, I'm okay and we're going to be okay. I belong on this team. I can work through this. We're going to develop tools and test those tools. Then there's some focus and some optimism that occurs. Tools start getting used. We start gaining confidence. We start refining and improving those tools. And then finally, there's achievement. There's an increasing level of success. Results start happening. We start seeing momentum and acceleration. That's when we achieve success. The important thing to remember about the J curve is that problems are going to occur. Simply by familiarizing yourself with the J curve model, it lets you know what to anticipate and know that it's not just you, it's not just this program or project that we're trying to put into place. You have to work through the problems with trust and confidence. And just know that if we do it correctly, there is a light at the end of the tunnel and we're going to get it implemented. So we should set up some change plans. So change models and plans will typically include the following. What are the reasons for the change? What's the type and scope of the change? The need to create a change management team, stakeholder analysis, support, and management activities, leadership and sponsorship that will help to support the change, a communication plan that helps us to carry people through and keep them informed and keep moving them from resistors to neutral and neutral to supporters. And we also need a method to track the adoption of the change. How barriers to adoption will be addressed. So let's do a little bit more on communication with stakeholders. So maintenance and reliability leaders have to know, must be capable of creating and executing a communication plan to achieve objectives. So remember stakeholder management. The goals of stakeholder management are to first understand who has objections and what those objections are. We need to get support from stakeholders. Support from stakeholders will be key to success. We have to learn what objections are, what the objections are, so that we can work on the solutions. And as I said, we want to move resistors to being neutral, and neutral people we want to be supporters, even advocates. We have to know how to remove barriers that create resistance, and we have to keep the communication channels open. We need to maintain and strengthen supporters and advocates. So how can we view this? Well, the first thing is that there are categories of stakeholders. There are approvers, influencers, customers, and supporters. Each of these categories help us to categorize how we're going to approach each of these folks. And it helps us to determine the what's in it for them when we're trying to communicate. We also then have to determine what's their level of support. And you can do this by a number of different ways, but one of the ways I've used in the past is to look at them on a scale of -2 to +2. And at -2, we would term these people as resistors. They're non-supportive. They actively work against the proposed improvements and initiatives. A -1 is somebody who tends to resist. They're not supportive, but they're not actively opposing. A 0 is a neutral. They don't resist, but they're not supporting either. A +1 tends to support. They support the proposed improvements, and if asked, they'll support it, but they're not actively doing it on their own. And then an advocate is a +2. Strongly support what we're after, and they actively work to change and work for change and the proposed improvements. Once we have this, we can then determine those resistors and those that tend to resist. What's the best way to convince them, communicate them, remove them as barriers to move them to neutral or to the +1 or +2 category? So there's a process for communicating with stakeholders. The first is to identify the stakeholder by category. The second is to determine the status of the stakeholders in terms of supporter or resistor, etc. Third, we want to create a stakeholder message. What is it that we want to communicate to these folks? And then identify the method that we want to communicate. And then perform the communication. And then we want to evaluate the effectiveness and keep communicating. And this happens, a good communication plan doesn't have to happen just for a change management process. It's a good practice to have in place for your day-to-day activities. You want to keep stakeholders engaged and informed. So this concludes the business and management overview for the body of knowledge, Pillar 1. Just as a summary, remember we talked about business basics. We want to learn to speak the language of finance. we want to create the maintenance and reliability strategic plan and think about that as setting the direction. And then we need to administer the plan. We want to put the plan into practice. We, of course, want to measure performance. So in order to do that, we should be defining the KPIs and the goals that we need to be able to achieve our objectives. Organizational change, we want to prepare and apply a change management model. The communication plans, we want to manage stakeholders to assure success. And remember, we don't need a communication plan just for projects. It's great to have a communication plan for day-to-day activities. And so with that, I'll open it up to questions. So Jess, if you have any questions that came in, I'll also just say this is my contact information, and this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on the SMRP's website in the library. But if you have a question that I can't get to this afternoon, feel free to reach out and contact me. I'm happy to discuss any of the SMRP body of knowledge topics. But if you need some clarification about anything I said today, or if I can help you out with anything, just reach out and give me a call.
Great, thank you, Tom. As of right now, we don't have any questions, but as Tom said, if you do have any questions, I will leave this open for the next 5 minutes, and you can type in your question as well as email either Tom or myself, and we can answer those questions for you.
Yeah, and so this was an overview of Pillar 1. So, it's a 1-hour session, so we can't go too deep into any particular aspect of it. But I hope you found it valuable, and I hope you'll get a copy of the new body of knowledge and take a run through it.
Tom, someone is asking if you could just show that recap slide, that conclusion slide one more time.
Sure. And I would like to get some feedback if you kind of appreciated the business basics, if it was too deep, not deep enough. Same thing with the rest of the topics. We'll be doing the other pillars coming up, so I'm trying to gauge whether I hit the right tone with this, and if not, I'll try to make improvements for the next one.
And Tom, I will also be able to, I can get a copy of your slides and send that out to those who are asking for the slides as well.
Yeah, that's not a problem. And I'll give you I had sent you the earlier one. I had made a few corrections to it. So I'll shoot you this final, and people will be able to have that.
Great, thank you. And we do have a few questions coming in, so we can probably go over a few before we hit that hour mark. One attendee is asking, once you pass the CMRP, what is the next step you should have in order to become a more effective reliability engineer? What would be your suggestion for that?
Oh, so like I'm a big fan of lifelong learning. So just getting the CMRP to start with is a great milestone. But every year, what I would suggest is that every year you pick out one of the pillars or several of the pillars and find a book, find a training course, find something that helps you to expand your knowledge in that subject area. Never stop learning. Always look at what's the next step. In a section later on organization and leadership, we're going to talk about an individual leader should have a personal set of mission, vision, values, and objectives, not just for the department. And so when you set up your personal ones, it should be aligned with how your current, what role you're currently in and what role you aspire to, and work on the things that would help you to fill in the blanks that would help you to be prepared and a good selection for that next position that you're looking for.
Great. Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
Another question. Most companies have good strategies but fail during the execution stage. Do you have any advice on the most effective ways to ensure once a strategy has been communicated, departments stay the course until that strategy is fully implemented?
Yeah, so that's exactly the reason why I wrote my book, The Productive Leadership System. Too many times there's a strategic plan or there's a change management activity that people are trying to put into place. And as a consultant, I would go into different organizations and I would see that 3 to 5 years earlier, there was a different consulting company and that was helping them try to do the same thing. And the earlier folks, their methodology was fine. Everything about what they tried to implement, there's not really a big argument over what they were trying to do. It was always in the execution and the sustainment. And so if you peel back the onion, the execution and sustainment is always about accountability and individual leader capabilities, right? So accountability, when you think about accountability, the senior person, whether that's we're talking about the plant manager or the maintenance manager, they're accountable to assess what it is that we're going to be doing. They're accountable to define how we're going to address it and to authorize the change. And then they're also accountable to implement that change until it becomes a common practice. The direct reports of that person are accountable to execute current guidance with current resources or assets. And they're also accountable, the junior person, the direct report is also accountable to notify the senior person when they don't have the guidance or the assets that they need to carry it out. And so typically what happens is either the assets are not available, so we decided we're going to do this change effort and halfway through the budget got cut or we got layoffs or whatever. Well, when those things happen, the direct reports are not going to be capable of performing above the level where guidance and resources or assets have been provided to perform, right? So my advice is if you're in an organization that has a recurring problem with this, make sure that you have a management system that overtly assigns accountability for those things, and then the individual leadership capability of the people that are involved with that change or that program need to be improved. And I think it's April or so that we're going to do the organization and leadership pillar. So we'll talk a lot more about that then. Shameless plug, if you'd like to buy my book, it's available on Amazon or Industrial Press, or if you contact me, I can get you a signed copy. But there's a lot in that book that would help you to define how you can solve that problem.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Looks like we're hitting that hour mark, so I would like to wrap things up. Just like to thank everyone who attended this webinar, and Tom, thank you again for presenting on Pillar 1. We will have other pillar topic presentations within the next several months, so you can go and register on the SMRP website for that as well. And just to add that one final reminder again, that this has been recorded and will be on the SMRP website under the online store. So again, thank you, Tom, for your presentation on Pillar 1.
Absolutely. And if you had a question and I wasn't able to get to it, please feel free to reach out. By email is best, but by text or mobile if you need to. Thank you, everybody.
Great.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.